The man had a gun pointed at my wife's face. Hands trembling, mouth pursed in that self-important way people wear when they think a uniform, any uniform, makes them invincible. His eyes bulged, his voice barked like a badly trained dog, and his stance said wannabe hero, but all I could think was how he had just made the worst decision of his life. Not because of the gun. Not because he was trespassing on the wrong property. But because the woman he was threatening, the one who hadn't even unpacked her field gear from her last mission, was Delta Force. Active. Not retired, not ceremonial, not used to be somebody. She was still somebody. And if he knew even a fraction of what she had done 2 nights ago in a place that would never make headlines, he would have put that plastic Glock knockoff in his mouth and begged for a time machine. He didn't. And that was his first mistake. We moved into that neighborhood for peace. Ironically, she had just returned from a 6-month deployment overseas, one of those places where the air smells like gunpowder and regret. And I, just your average cybersecurity nerd with a caffeine dependency and a deep love for Ethernet cables, wanted a basement with fiber internet and zero drama. We were told the community was family-focused, gated, quiet, HOA managed, which, at the time, sounded like an upside. Lawn care rules, monthly movie nights, kids drawing chalk art on sidewalks, dogs and strollers, America with training wheels. That illusion lasted exactly 8 days. I still remember the sales pitch brochure. Welcome to Haven Oaks Estates, a sanctuary for families, safety-first living, and community-driven values. We had visited the model home on a sunny afternoon in June. There were lemonade stands at the corners, American flags on every porch. Even the squirrels looked like they paid taxes. The real estate agent, a chirpy blonde in kitten heels and military-grade foundation, practically radiated Pinterest energy. She used phrases like community enrichment, security conscious, and optional social leadership pathways, like she was trying to sell us a country club inside a military base. We didn't ask too many questions. That was our mistake. We didn't notice the golf carts at first. 4 of them, matte black, parked outside the HOA clubhouse like a mini armored convoy for dads who didn't quite make it into law enforcement, but watched Die Hard religiously. They had decals that read HSD, Home Safety Division, and the drivers wore matching tactical vests, complete with utility belts, earpieces, and clipboards. One of them had a siren rigged to the roof, zip-tied in a way that would have made MacGyver weep. I thought it was a joke. I laughed. "Oh cool, cosplay neighborhood watch," I said. She didn't laugh. Just squinted, the way she does when she's processing a threat vector. The woman you see jogging at sunrise with earbuds in. That's a choice. That's someone who is choosing calm. Choosing to blend. Because under that hoodie is a body that knows 27 ways to kill someone before breakfast. And I know this because I've seen her in training footage. I've seen her eyes during a breach. That wasn't my wife in those moments. That was something else entirely. But in the neighborhood, she was just the woman who gardened in compression sleeves and drank green tea like it was religion. She wanted peace. So badly she was willing to pretend she hadn't seen what the HOA was slowly becoming. The president of the HOA, Karen Brewster, introduced herself within the first hour of our arrival. She wore 3 clipboards like accessories and a laminated badge that said President in Comic Sans. Her smile was surgically sculpted to make you feel like you had just broken a rule. "Welcome to Haven Oaks," she chirped. "We have guidelines to ensure harmony. I'm always available, day or night, for community matters." She handed us a binder. Not a pamphlet. A binder. In it, rules. Regulations. A list of finable offenses that included everything from unsanctioned flag display to intimidating presence during recreational activity. When I asked her what that meant, she didn't even blink. "You'll know it when you see it." I knew then. This place wasn't what it looked like. My wife. She nodded politely, said thank you, and went back to unpacking the garage like she hadn't just been handed a starter pack for suburban dictatorship. That's the thing about her. She doesn't react. Not until it matters. She calls it control. I call it the calm before Category 5. For the next week, we played the game, smiled at neighbors, picked up after our dog, trimmed the lawn precisely to 2.75 inches because apparently anything longer was a social threat. Meanwhile, she installed perimeter cameras, not because she was paranoid but because habit dies last. She watched patterns, golf cart patrol routes, clipboard check-ins, who lingered outside whose house. She didn't say much, but I could tell by the way her fingers twitched when she was silent that she had already started a threat map. Then came the morning. The one with the jog. The one that changed everything. She tied her shoes like always, checked her earbuds, kissed me goodbye with the same casual affection she used before parachuting into conflict zones. "Back in 20, she said. I made coffee, sat at my desk. Then came the ping, motion alert from our driveway camera. I looked up, expecting Amazon. What I saw instead made the mug fall from my hand and shatter on the floor. 2 black golf carts blocked the street. Diagonal. Strategic. Like they'd seen a convoy drill and thought, we can do that. My wife stood calmly between them, arms slightly raised. In front of her, a man with a potbelly stuffed into a tactical vest 2 sizes too small held a pistol at chest level. His stance was textbook wrong. His finger was twitching on the trigger like it had its own heartbeat. I ran. No shoes. Just panic. The world blurred into noise and concrete. By the time I reached them, 2 more officers had arrived, forming a loose semicircle like backup dancers auditioning for a bad action movie. They all looked unsure, except the man with the gun. He was yelling about ID, about suspicious movement, about protocol. My wife was silent. Still. Calm. That's when I saw it. Her right hand. A twitch. Small. Precise. Code for I've got this. She asked once, clearly, firmly, if the man was law enforcement. He said, and I quote, "We're HOA police. That's higher than city cops here." I swear to God, I saw the corner of her mouth twitch upward. The smirk. The one that means you just activated your own doom. She gave him one chance. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to lower your weapon. For your own safety." He didn't. What happened next didn't look real. 1 second he was standing, the next he was on the ground, gun skittering across the pavement, his arm locked in a hold that made him look like a discarded marionette. She didn't even break a sweat. Leaned in. Whispered something. I'll never know what. But his face went pale like she had spoken his expiration date. And that was just the opening scene. The story hadn't even started. Karen Brewster didn't blink when the Real police arrived. She was already there by the time the cruisers rolled in, clutching her clipboards like holy relics and issuing orders to her HOA lackeys like she was running a military tribunal. Her expression when the lead officer took one look at my wife's ID and said, "Ma'am, you're good to go," was the kind of frozen, barely processed disbelief that only happens when someone's entire illusion of power meets the immovable wall of reality. And yet, even as her security captain groaned on the ground, nursing a dislocated ego, Karen doubled down. Because people like Karen don't retreat. They escalate. That same night, we received a printed notice slid under our door, a summons, she called it, for an emergency community accountability meeting. It sounded like a star chamber with snacks. My wife sipped her tea, unreadable. I stared at the absurdly formal wording like it was some cursed riddle. It was scheduled for 7 p.m. sharp. The community center. Dress code. Neighborhood professional. Whatever that meant. By 6:30, it looked like the Super Bowl outside. Folding chairs lined the sidewalks. A teenager had set up a live stream with a GoPro on a tripod. Someone wheeled in a cooler. A woman I'd never seen before passed out popcorn in little HOA-labeled paper bags. It was absurd, theatrical, and just unhinged enough that I couldn't look away. My wife refused to attend. She didn't need to. Her reputation was already halfway to legend. Instead, she watched the live feed from our porch, wrapped in a hoodie, sipping from her world's okayest Gardner mug. I showed up late on purpose, wearing my wife's other ride as a Blackhawk t-shirt, and carried a legal pad, not to take notes, but because it made people like Karen twitch. The meeting started exactly 2 minutes behind schedule. In HOA time, that was considered chaos. Karen stood at the podium, arms stiff, jaw set like a Revolutionary War reenactor preparing for verbal combat. Behind her was a whiteboard with hand-drawn stick figures, one labeled threat actor, the other, absurdly muscular, labeled heroic defense. The whole thing looked like a 5th grader's book report on crime prevention. She adjusted her microphone 3 times, cleared her throat twice, then launched into her speech like she was addressing a nation at war. "It is with great sorrow that I report a violent and deliberate attack on one of our home safety officers," she began. Her voice trembled, not with sadness, but with tightly wound performative outrage. The audience was quiet, shifting uncomfortably, unsure whether they were watching community policy or community theater. Our peacekeeper, Captain Fredrickson, was physically assaulted during a routine safety inquiry. At this, she gestured toward the man himself, now sitting in a sling at the side of the stage, looking like someone who'd accidentally stapled his own dignity to a stop sign. I raised my hand. "Yes, Mr. Owens?" Karen asked, voice clipped. "What's the alleged history of aggression you mentioned in your email?" I asked, keeping my tone level. Because I've lived with her for 15 years, and she's never so much as raised her voice at a neighbor. Unless the chickens count as witnesses. A smattering of chuckles rolled through the room. Karen stiffened. "Mr. Owens, I would appreciate it if we could keep comments respectful." "Just seeking clarity," I said. She was jogging. With earbuds. Not exactly threatening behavior. "She was listening to a true crime podcast," Karen snapped. "That indicates intent." The silence that followed was breathtaking. Someone in the back coughed. Another whispered, "Is she serious?" Karen soldiered on, presenting her so-called evidence. Fragments of HOA bylaws, screenshots from a neighborhood watch group thread, and finally body cam footage. What she didn't realize, what she couldn't have predicted, was that one of the HOA officers, in a misguided attempt to feel more official, had purchased a budget body cam and set it to sync automatically to the cloud. And one of the neighborhood kids, probably 15 and a future cyber ops specialist, had already pulled the raw footage and uploaded it. Several residents brought laptops. The footage rolled. There she was, my wife, jogging, earbuds in, minding her own business. The golf cart screeched into view. The shouting began. The gun appeared. And within seconds, the man was on the ground, disarmed, unharmed, and very, very confused. When the video ended, the room was utterly silent. Not with fear, but recognition. Karen's narrative had just exploded in high definition. Someone whispered, "She should be running the HOA." Karen snapped, "That footage is unauthorized. It's taken out of context." "What context justifies pointing a gun at a woman running past a mailbox?" someone asked. "She could have been casing houses." Karen shouted, "Casing?" I said, standing up now. "You mean exercising?" Murmurs spread. People shifted. The temperature in the room changed. And that was when Karen made her second mistake. She tried to regain control. But her tools, fear, fines, bureaucracy, only work when people are uncertain. That night, people weren't uncertain anymore. They were awake. We returned home to find an envelope taped to our door. Certified mail. No return address. Inside, an HOA violation report. Multiple citations. Failure to display ID, hostile jogging, and my personal favorite, presence likely to intimidate. Total fines, $1,470. Due immediately. Non-payment would result in escalated enforcement. My wife didn't react. She read it once, turned it over, and began writing on the back, names, dates, events. A list. It wasn't about the fine. It wasn't even about the absurdity. It was about the pattern. And when you've dismantled insurgent networks in foreign war zones, pattern recognition is second nature. The next day, HOA patrols doubled. Golf carts began circling our property like sharks with beverage holders. One of them aimed a radar gun at our mailbox. Another crouched behind our hydrangeas with binoculars. It would have been hilarious if it weren't so dystopian. Karen had declared war. But she didn't understand the battlefield. My wife didn't raise her voice. Didn't raise a hand. She raised data. Pulled public records. Cross-referenced financial disclosures. And uncovered a company called Verdant Horizon LLC. On paper, they were responsible for $180,000 in landscaping improvements, fountains, roads, gardens. In reality, 2 fountains, 1 cracked sidewalk, and a weed-infested patch of dirt behind the clubhouse. Verdant Horizon wasn't real. Not really. It was a shell, registered under the name of Captain Clipboard's cousin. She found the payments, matched them with security footage. No deliveries. No trucks. No work. Just numbers shifting in quiet corners of HOA budgets. She compiled a file. Clean. Precise. And she sent it, through a very specific channel, to a federal auditor. Karen's third mistake. Assuming the quiet ones don't know how to hit back. 48 hours later, a formal records request was issued to the HOA board. Karen locked down the clubhouse. Posted a members-only sign. Stationed a guard with what appeared to be a leaf blower weaponized into some sort of deterrent device. But the residents? They had already begun whispering. Asking questions. Who's getting paid? Why were fines rising? Why did they need a police force in a suburb with a 2% crime rate and most offenses involving misplaced recycling bins? Flyers began appearing under doormats. Simple bullet points. No accusations. Just questions. And sources. And numbers. Karen tried another tactic, a live stream. Draped in an oversized blazer and flanked by the HOA seal she had designed herself, she called the audit fake, accused my wife of being part of a domestic threat operation, and claimed she was under federal harassment. The irony? My wife had 2 bronze stars and was technically still on the payroll of the very people Karen was accusing her of threatening. That night, my wife received a message. Not from her unit. Not from the base. From higher. It contained just 4 words, need to verify status. She responded. 10 minutes later, the phone rang. A voice from long ago, clipped, calm, precise. They asked if she was okay. If she needed support. Not the kind with rifles. The kind with leverage. Legal. Surgical. Institutional. She declined. For now. But the message was clear. Karen had wandered far past her pay grade. And now things were about to get interesting. The envelope came 3 days later, this time delivered by a man in khakis and sunglasses who didn't say a word, just handed it over like it contained radiation. My wife opened it calmly like it was just another shopping flyer, but when she unfolded the letter, her eyes narrowed slightly, her version of a raised eyebrow. The HOA, undeterred by the federal audit request and growing community unrest, had decided to triple down. This was no longer just an attempt at discipline. It was a message. The letter accused her of violating 6 new bylaws passed in response to the recent hostile incidents, which of course had neither been voted on nor legally filed. Violations included failure to respect administrative authority, visibly militant demeanor, and a new clause about unauthorized influence on communal opinion, which sounded less like a housing rule and more like something out of a Cold War propaganda manual. The total fine now exceeded $2,000. Payment required within 48 hours, or enforcement measures will escalate accordingly. My wife didn't even flinch. She simply flipped the paper over, drew a small diagram, and began annotating connections, dates, names, inconsistencies. It wasn't anger I saw in her. It was the same look she had when decrypting hostile communications overseas. She was mapping an operation. And Karen, poor clipboard-clutching Karen, had just promoted herself to primary target. That same evening, we noticed the cameras. Not ours, we had installed those months ago. These were different. One perched discreetly inside a decorative birdhouse near our driveway. Another behind a solar-powered lawn light across the street. I spotted a third embedded in the HOA bulletin board. I counted 5 total, each carefully angled to track movements around our home. A lesser person might have panicked. A regular person might have called the police. My wife. She brewed another cup of tea. Then, without saying a word, she walked out the front door with a screwdriver, a smile, and a notebook. 15 minutes later, all 5 cameras were disassembled, tagged, and logged. That night, she drafted a formal cease and desist letter citing 3 federal privacy violations and attached time-stamped footage of her removing the devices. She sent it to Karen, CC'd to every board member, and the local press. By morning, whispers had turned into quiet alliances. Mrs. Hillman, a retired attorney with a sharp tongue and an encyclopedic knowledge of municipal code, showed up at our door with a zip folder and a flash drive. Inside, every HOA financial report from the last 5 years. Let me know what you find, she said deadpan, but I can already tell you they've been laundering money through the annual spring picnic. My wife smiled. Perfect. While Karen hunkered down inside the clubhouse, issuing bulletins filled with phrases like community integrity and safeguarding our values, my wife printed data. Spreadsheets, screenshots, comparisons, diagrams, all public, all clean. We delivered them door to door with friendly notes. Not accusatory, just factual. Just enough to make someone pause before writing their next HOA check. Then came the night patrols. At first, they just loitered, golf carts parked across from our house, engines idling softly like judgmental lawnmowers. Then they escalated. Flashlights pointed through our windows. Notes left under windshield wipers. One officer stood across the street and took photos of our recycling bins for an hour. We knew what they were doing, intimidation theater. But this wasn't my wife's first playhouse. Instead of retaliating, she installed floodlights. High-powered, motion-sensitive, and programmed to blast Beethoven's Fifth when triggered. It worked beautifully. The first night it activated, the HOA patrol screamed and ducked behind a bush. The second night, they simply left. Karen, furious and cornered, hosted a live stream. Again, this time from what looked like a bunker made of storage totes and curtain rods. She wore a scarf, large sunglasses, and addressed the community like a leader exiled by revolution. There are forces attempting to undermine everything this neighborhood stands for, she intoned. Enemies within. She never named my wife, but the implication was clear. She ended the stream by unveiling a banner. Operation Clean Sweep. The next day, HOA members were issued clipboards, walkie-talkies, and laminated authority badges. Karen called them peacekeepers. We called them mall cops with delusions of grandeur. They started issuing citations en masse. Overdrown grass. Unapproved wind chimes. Inadequate seasonal decor. One family received a warning for improper flag etiquette because their child had drawn a rainbow on the driveway with chalk. The neighborhood was turning. Not against us, but against her. Flyers continued to circulate, more lawn signs appeared, and every audit detail we shared was verified by neighbors digging into their own paperwork. One night, a man knocked on our door. Retired Air Force. He handed my wife a folder. I used to run logistics. If you need procurement records, I know how to track where the real money went. She nodded. They didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. 2 days later, the city council got involved. Enough complaints had triggered a review hearing. Karen tried to dismiss it as internal affairs, but was quickly overruled. She filed a preemptive injunction to delay the hearing. It failed. Then she filed a restraining order against my wife. This was her 4th mistake. Her evidence included edited footage that conveniently cut out the moment her officer pulled a gun. What she didn't anticipate, again, was that 3 separate neighbors had already submitted the full, unedited recordings. The judge watched silently, face unreadable. After 5 minutes, he removed his glasses, looked Karen dead in the eye, and said, "You are wasting the court's time." The motion was dismissed on the spot. No one clapped, but we all felt it. That silent shift. The sound of authority collapsing under its own weight. That same week, HOA patrols vanished. Golf carts sat abandoned. Karen stopped appearing in person. Instead, she communicated via bulletins, long, rambling walls of text filled with legal jargon and bad grammar, like a conspiracy theorist found Microsoft Word. One bulletin included a new bylaw requiring all residents to display community loyalty symbols on their lawns. No one did. Another demanded mandatory attendance at weekly HOA briefings. No one showed. My wife, meanwhile, launched what she called Operation Curb Appeal, a campaign of quiet reclamation. She coordinated with neighbors to organize unofficial block meetings. They shared resources, compared fines, built a case. By the end of the month, they had enough evidence to request full financial oversight of the HOA. Karen's final gambit came in the form of a mailed letter, stamped urgent legal matter. Inside, pages of pseudo-legal threats, citations of obscure zoning codes, and an accusation that my wife was engaged in psychological destabilization of communal leadership. It was laughable. It was also her last card. My wife forwarded it to the same federal agency already monitoring the HOA's finances. Then she sat down calmly and drafted a formal cease and desist. Not in her own name, but on federal letterhead, because apparently she still had that clearance and that authority. The document was signed, sealed, and delivered, hand-delivered, by an officer in a Navy windbreaker and mirrored sunglasses. He said nothing, just handed it to Karen, who, according to a neighbor, stood frozen for almost a full minute before scurrying inside like a roach caught in floodlight. The clubhouse closed the next day. Locks changed. Patrols ceased. The bulletin board was empty for the first time since we moved in. But we both knew this wasn't the end. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat. Not while she could still reach for another clipboard. And my wife wasn't the type to lower her guard, not yet. Because this wasn't just about fines or bylaws anymore. It was about something deeper. Power. Ego. Control. And my wife knew better than anyone. Those things never go quietly. They have to be dismantled. One document at a time. It started with a flyer. Plain white paper, no logos, no dramatic fonts. Just bullet points in clean, sans serif text listing exactly where the HOA's money had gone, and more importantly, where it hadn't. Each fact was backed by public records, time-stamped security footage, and comparative screenshots. There were no accusations, no inflammatory language. Just receipts. We printed 80 copies that first night, slipped them under doormats and into mailboxes with a note at the bottom. You have a right to know how your dues are being used. No signature. No name. Just facts. By morning, half the neighborhood had seen it. By afternoon, it was on Facebook. Karen tried to stop it with one of her infamous bulletins, this one titled Community Disinformation Alert. It warned residents of a coordinated smear campaign, orchestrated by unnamed actors seeking to dismantle the sanctity of the HOA institution. She included bolded phrases like civil unrest and homefront insurrection. No one took it seriously anymore. A few hours later, someone printed her bulletin and taped it to the dog waste bin at the park with the word fan fiction written across it in red Sharpie. That evening, we noticed the signs. Lawn signs. Professionally printed, cheeky, and devastatingly accurate. One read, HOA equals humorless overreach association. Another said, obey or pay, Karen's rules of order. My personal favorite had a cartoon of Karen's face on a gavel with the caption, make suburbia fear again. By the end of the week, there were at least 20 signs scattered across the neighborhood. Karen responded with threats, official notices declaring all non-sanctioned signage a violation of aesthetic harmony. No one cared. No one removed their signs. One neighbor added solar lighting to his. Another laminated his and zip-tied it to his mailbox like it was a public notice. The shift wasn't just visual. It was social. People who once avoided eye contact now greeted each other. Conversations bloomed across driveways. A makeshift town hall was organized in the cul-de-sac, complete with folding chairs, a projector, and printed packets titled, How to Recall Your HOA Board, Legally and Effectively. My wife attended in silence, sitting near the back, her presence alone enough to keep the meeting focused and productive. She didn't lead. She didn't need to. Her actions had already made her the axis around which the neighborhood pivoted. Then came the public hearing. Mrs. Hillman, the retired lawyer, had submitted a formal petition to the city council to investigate the HOA's legal authority and financial transparency. Enough signatures were gathered in less than 72 hours. The hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Karen tried to block it with a cease and desist filed through a third-party legal service she found online. The court rejected it in minutes. The night before the hearing, my wife laid out her materials. One manila folder. That was it. No dramatic presentations, no binders. Just documents and a quiet readiness that made the air around her feel sharp. I asked her if she was nervous. She just smiled and said, "Karen's never been in front of people who ask real questions." The city council chamber was standing room only. Karen arrived flanked by two of her remaining loyalists and a dolly cart stacked with binders labeled Defense Dossier and Emergency Policy Framework. She wore a navy pantsuit and a Bluetooth headset she never actually used. She opened her remarks by referring to herself as President Brewster, then launched into a meandering speech about community safety, traditional values, and something she called suburban sovereignty. Halfway through, she introduced a slideshow that included graphs with no axes, a pixelated HOA crest, and what looked like a clip art tank labeled Crisis Response Model. When it was my wife's turn, she walked up, placed her folder on the podium, and spoke with the calmness of someone used to debriefing generals. She didn't perform. She informed. She presented the fake landscaping company, the shell accounts, the forged signatures on recent bylaw changes. She listed exact dollar amounts, showed aerial footage of non-existent upgraded parks, and quoted municipal law with such surgical precision that even the council's legal advisor began taking notes. She ended with a recording. Karen's voice, clear and unmistakable. "We don't need a vote. I make the rules here. If they don't like it, they can leave. Or I'll make them." The room went dead silent. Then the council president leaned forward. "Mrs. Owens," he said, "would you mind telling us your background?" My wife paused. "I currently serve in a classified capacity within a United States Army Tier 1 Special Mission Unit. I've been operational for over a decade, specializing in threat assessment and counterintelligence." A long pause. Then another council member, an older man in a faded army pin, nodded. "I thought I recognized you. Welcome home, ma'am." Karen's composure cracked visibly. Her shoulders slumped, her mouth opened and closed without words. The council ruled unanimously to freeze all HOA operations pending full financial audit and legal review. Residents were advised not to pay dues until the investigation concluded. Karen left without speaking to anyone. Her minivan peeled out of the lot like a getaway car. The following days were quiet. No bulletins, no patrols, no late-night flashlights. The clubhouse stayed dark. It felt like someone had flipped the power switch on a bad dream. But my wife didn't relax. She monitored. She documented. She walked the perimeter at sunrise like always. And then came the cart chase. It wasn't supposed to be dramatic. My wife had been distributing updated audit summaries to the few residents who hadn't received them yet. She wore a hoodie that read, "Love thy neighbor," and carried a tote bag. That was it. Karen, either unaware or willfully ignoring the cease and desist order, sent her last loyalist, Captain Clipboard, after her. He revved the golf cart engine like it was a tank, shouting something about code red retrieval protocol. My wife didn't run. She stepped off the sidewalk. What he didn't know was that the sidewalk near our house had a shallow trench where the landscapers had forgotten to fill in properly. He swerved, overcorrected, and flipped. The golf cart landed in a bush. She didn't say anything. She retrieved her tote bag, dropped a granola bar next to him, and kept walking. The footage went viral. Again. That night, the HOA board formally disbanded. Multiple members resigned. Karen didn't show up to the next council review. A federal compliance letter was posted to the community bulletin board the next day. All HOA enforcement was to cease immediately, pending investigation. Karen disappeared. Rumor had it she moved to a nearby town and applied for work at a real estate firm. The signs came down slowly. People reclaimed their yards. Kids biked freely again. Neighbors stopped looking over their shoulders. It felt like exhaling for the first time in months. But something in my wife's posture told me it wasn't over. That Karen wasn't the last chapter. Just the last page of this particular one. And when the black SUV pulled up at sunrise a week later, when the suited man stepped out and handed her that envelope, she didn't even look surprised. She opened it in silence. Read. Folded it carefully. Then turned to me with that look I hadn't seen since her last deployment. "When do you leave?" I asked. "At dawn," she said. She packed light. She didn't say where she was going. Just left a note on my desk. Karen was just the warm-up. This is the mission. No signature. Just the truth. At sunrise, I watched her walk into that SUV, calm and steady. She didn't look back. I didn't expect her to. The SUV disappeared down the street, just as the morning sun cracked through the tops of the oak trees, casting long gold slashes across the pavement like a spotlight behind her exit. I stood on the porch with my coffee going cold, the silence ringing louder than any siren Karen ever blasted across the neighborhood. She was gone. No fanfare, no goodbye speech, not even a look over the shoulder. Just the quiet certainty of someone stepping back into the world she never really left. The street felt emptier without her presence, but not hollow. Just paused. Suspended. I went inside, found the note again on my desk, and reread it. Karen was just the warm-up. This is the mission. It was the kind of line you couldn't unhear once you read it. The kind that didn't just close a chapter, it warned of a new book entirely. Over the next few weeks, life in the neighborhood settled into something that resembled peace. Tom, the retired postal worker with a soft voice and an iron spine, was elected interim HOA chair by unanimous vote. His first act was to hold an emergency meeting, an actual one, open forum, no clipboards or tactical vests allowed. He started with one bylaw, and one only: don't be a jerk. It passed without objection. Fines were canceled, dues were paused, and the clubhouse was reopened, stripped of its security gear and turned into a community coffee spot. Someone brought in a piano. Someone else added a stack of books labeled, "Take one, leave one." Kids roller skated in the parking lot like it was 1996 again. The transformation was almost disorienting. Like waking up in the same house but finding the walls have been repainted in warmth. But still there were remnants. Ghosts of Karen's regime lingered. Old signs, still stapled to lamp posts. Faint outlines of surveillance stickers on windows. Every so often, a neighbor would bring over an envelope they found wedged behind a bush or taped under their mailbox. Remnants of fines and signed citations, half-written threats. We'd laugh, a little nervously, then toss them in the fire pit during Friday evening block gatherings. My wife didn't come back that month, nor the next. I received no messages, no updates. I didn't expect any. That was part of the deal when you married a ghost with a government paycheck. But then, about 9 weeks after she left, something arrived in the mail. Plain manila envelope. No return address. No postmark. Inside was a single sheet, an official commendation from the Department of Defense, recognizing exceptional conduct in civilian oversight and protection of constitutional community governance. Underneath, in handwriting too sharp to be anyone else's, was a note: "We're proud of how you handled it. See you soon." I placed it in her secure cabinet, the one I never opened, the one with the biometric lock only she could access. I stood there for a while, hand hovering over the drawer, wondering what else might be in there. I didn't look. I didn't want to. Then, just when I had started thinking this chapter had finally closed, Karen came back. Of course she did. She didn't return with fanfare or another live stream. No, she reappeared in a rented minivan and a pair of oversized sunglasses, walking up our porch like she still owned the sidewalk. In her hands, a leather folder labeled Personal Legal Defense. She didn't knock. She didn't speak. She just set the folder down on the mat and turned away like she was delivering a final chess move. I watched from the window. My wife would have clocked her immediately. Would have noted the direction of retreat, the vehicle license plate, the tension in her shoulders. Me? I just watched her walk like someone trying too hard to look unfazed. The folder was full of dense legal deflections, citations taken wildly out of context, and an entire narrative spun to paint herself as the victim of a calculated military smear campaign. According to Karen, the audit was fraudulent, the resignations were coerced, and my wife was a psychological operative using intimidation tactics to subvert legitimate leadership. There were diagrams, charts, even a photoshopped image of my wife next to a tank, which would have been laughable if it hadn't been so deeply unhinged. Karen was threatening to escalate, to federal litigation no less. My wife's response, even in absence, was as precise as ever. I forwarded the folder to the same federal office that had issued the cease and desist. Within days, we received a brief reply confirming receipt and advising us that Karen's actions had already triggered multiple investigations. That could have been the end of it, but Karen couldn't help herself. She filed her own case, represented herself in court. According to a neighbor who watched the live stream, she began her opening statement with a slideshow that included dramatic red arrows and clip art of gavels. She cited non-existent statutes, claimed immunity due to neighborhood executive privilege, and attempted to prove my wife's militant presence by showing grainy footage of her pruning roses while wearing tactical gloves. It lasted 11 minutes before the judge stopped her. He asked one question: did you have the legal authority to issue fines, detain residents, or impersonate law enforcement in your neighborhood? Karen tried to pivot. The judge didn't let her. What followed was a clean dismantling, not just of her case, but of her entire identity. The court ruled against her on all counts. She was fined, barred from any residential governance role for a decade, and required to issue a public apology to all affected residents. She didn't. But the damage was already done. Life continued. We hosted our first community-wide block party since the collapse of the old regime. Burgers sizzled, dogs chased bubbles, and music poured out of Bluetooth speakers like freedom itself. Someone handed me a lawn sign that read "Neighborhood Hero, 0 fines since 2024. I laughed. Then I left it on the porch, half expecting her to smirk at it when she returned. And then, one ordinary morning, the SUV reappeared. This one was darker, sleeker, no markings, just presence. The door opened. She stepped out, not rushed, Not exhausted. Just steady. Her posture had that tension again, not rigid but coiled, like a spring that never fully unwinds. We didn't say anything at first. I just met her at the edge of the driveway, hands in my pockets, unsure what belonged to us anymore. She nodded once. I smiled. Was Karen the warm-up? I asked. She exhaled a single laugh, dry and knowing. Turns out, a lot of neighborhoods have Karens. This one was just first. Mission accomplished? This one, yes. Others? Always. She didn't unpack right away. She didn't tell me anything I didn't already know. But she did pull the old garden gloves from her bag. The same gloves from the rose pruning footage Karen had tried to use as evidence. She held them like something sacred, then placed them beside the porch steps and said, "Might need these again." That night, we sat under the stars. No more surveillance lights. No golf cart engines. Just crickets, soft porch light, and the faint sound of someone strumming a guitar 2 houses down. Peace isn't always quiet. Sometimes it hums with potential. With memory. With the knowledge that people like her, people who fight with strategy instead of fists, can change everything without firing a shot. A week later, another envelope arrived. This one marked with higher clearance codes than I'd ever seen. She opened it, read it once, then set it down. "You going?" I asked. She nodded. "It's not a war," she said, "but it's close." "Need backup?" I joked. She smiled. "Just keep the porch light on." And at dawn again, she was gone. This time, I didn't need to watch. I just sat at the kitchen table, coffee warm, watching the neighborhood breathe like it had lungs again. A place no longer ruled by fear or fines. Just people living. And somewhere out there, my wife, reminding another Karen that dictatorship doesn't survive where people remember how to fight back.